argument is somehow in tension with Eliav's argument, because we see that the formal international law is not the main vehicle for change here, but we are moving to ad hoc political decisions. It's also interesting that because I would emphasize it even more, your point, because according to international law of refugees, as you presented it, the Russian immigration refugees should have been had a priority everywhere, because they fit into the refugee much better than the Ukrainian. But they, other than in Israel, I think they face a lot of obstacles as opposed to Ukrainian refugees who are welcomed in Europe. So we see that formal international law is not what is leading the way, at least with. So this is an interesting way to look at the bullshit arguments on the one hand and the actual. Another question that I would try to get you all together is precisely of how much can we heard here the first presentation, a move towards collective responsibility, which is a no-no in international law. How much a society under authoritarian regime can be accountable for what is being done, not moving from being accepted as refugees, but as actually accountable. Is this criminal accountability? Is it an other civil responsibility? Is there responsibility at all given? So I would like to open this, and as I said after Eliav's talk, I found it really interesting to think of this kind of bullshit arguments, how they progress allow international law to progress, and we see it a lot with human rights being taken up by non-liberals as a vehicle of repression in various countries. So it's not just about Russia's Putin. So it's a big question of legitimacy versus an acknowledgement of limitations versus the contamination of international law. As I put it there, I think international lawyers often fail to realize the importance of international law vehicles towards the internal societies as opposed to the bigger international law. This is the big argument of Judith Schlar, who said we shouldn't look at the Nuremberg trials as what do they do to international law. We should look at them, how are they affecting the legitimacy and education of German society towards democracy and how it is internally understood. So I think here we have. So first of all, before I open for Q&A, maybe to allow you to respond, to comment maybe on each other if you want, or to ask a question to each other before we open it.
Do you want us to respond to what you?
No, or to what I did. It's just an invitation, yes.
No, just one thing. The problem of collective responsibility, I think it's one of the more difficult ones. I think it's wrongful. I think we should not go there for two basic reasons. first, in moral terms, what you're doing is that you're using people as means. Okay, I'll begin first. So, first you have an epistemic problem. You don't really know how much ordinary people are actually responsible for what's going on, how much coercion is going on. There's circumstances in which they were raised. Did they have the option to really develop themselves to have another point of view? So you have this epistemic problem, and that, I think, brings forth a moral problem that if they're not really responsible, you're using them as means to pressure an authoritarian regime. We have this a lot in the discussions regarding Gaza. That Israelis seem to think that because Hamas is A or B, so that might justify pressure on the civilian population in Gaza because they might support Hamas or whatever. So I think this is a non-starter. But what is plausible is that, it's kind of understanding this, well, you have to do something, and you're actually trying to pressurize those responsible, meaning the state apparatus. You're targeting the state apparatus with those directly supporting it, and then you might have some incidental effects on other people. But then, of course, you have to, not everyone in this table would agree with me, but then there's this proportionality question, how much is too much as an incidental effect for this type of pressure. Whether we have crossed this threshold in Russia or not, I think it's open for the debate. I don't think so. But yeah, for sure.
I'd like to say that in many circles of Western politicians, now the idea is discussed that we have to change regime in Russia. The easiest way that Russian Secret Service leaders could choose in this situation is just to kill Putin secretly. He will just, die very surprisingly tomorrow, for example. And nobody will understand that somebody used Novichok or something like that. And that's all. Who will be next? All the Russian elite, Secret Service officers, for example, the next will be Patrushev. And Patrushev will say, we are innocent. We are innocent country. Just Putin himself, he was a criminal, he was a monster. And what's next? Let us talk with new Russia. What is new in this Russia? Only the Putin is dead? It will not change the style of thinking. The very style of thinking of average Russian people is genocidal. They are ready to kill Ukrainians. And what they are doing, for example, near Kiev in Bucha, there were no orders of Putin or of generals to kill and rape and torture. There were no such orders from high officers. They were ready and they were glad to do it. It was part, yes, it's ideology, but it's not ideology of Putin. And where is the front line between the ideology and idea? What's the front line between the ideology as imposed and consciousness and mentality of people? This people was raised for at least for 300-400 years, and they can point even more, even medieval things, but for 300 years as people messiah, as a people who has special rights, that is better than others, that has to to take and to rule over other people, that has to reintegrate and to deprive Ukrainians and Belarusians of any rights. And the same as Ukrainian language was prohibited in Russian Empire for a long time. It's not today. And the same in the Soviet time, they had to allow language and culture and other things, but by many reasons. And it was not a gift, but anyway, it was special politics. I can say about many means and other things. In difference between repressions, style and scope in Ukraine and other parts, Russian parts and Russian of Soviet Union. And the same about Holodomor and other things. It's a part of ideology. And they reading today Karamzin, and the Karamzin in the same Nazi than Putin. Absolutely the same Russism will be found in classical Russian works that Pogodin, Karamzin and others. So hundreds of years. It's about denazification, it's about the deimperialization, and it is not just a responsibility of regime. Yes, if we are talking about criminal responsibility, and we are talking about the experience of Nuremberg trials in Yugoslavia, in some other countries. We can speak about responsibility, not about the politicians, not about the military chiefs, not about the average soldiers who made massive crimes, military crimes, but also about propagandists and the vast scope of people who could be named propagandists, and we know it was effective when we were speaking about Africa and some genocides, and it was searched and somewhere found in the radio of Seven Hills and other things. It's all known things. But about society, it has to be first, reparations is economical sphere, but anyway, it's a responsibility. And when you're taking state assets, you're not taking assets of, it's not only yachts of regime members, but you're taking state assets. It's also the responsibility of the society and of the state. And the second is moral responsibility. So it has to be some de-imperialization of education, some de-imperialization of thinking in one or another means. And everybody knows about the system of denazification that was in Germany. We will not have such a possibility in Russia.
Okay.
Russia will not be taken, Russians will not be taken to concentration camps and to see the results that of the society that is silent all the time. But what my colleague started about, the society is responsible, and society has no right just to preserve the silence. And when we will compare Russia with Iran or China, now we see protests in Iran. They are dying they are dying for their rights. They are ready to die for their rights. And when we see in the China, if you consider the China or Iran is more liberal than Russia, in China they are ready to risk with their lives and the lives of their families for their rights because of virus of COVID restrictions. And what about Russians? I'm sorry.
We will have time for a lot of questions.
I'm sorry. The last thing I have to say. I had been in Moscow when Bolotnaya Square protests were massacred. And I saw this by my eyes. And what I saw, 10 policemen with sticks running after 100 people, protesters. And they are coming to dead end. And they are just beaten, these people beaten to blood, beaten to on heads and other things. And what these people doing? They're just sitting and ready for next will be beaten. They are not taking guns in their hands. They are having just sticks, 10 policemen, and 100 is waiting to be punished. This is about mentality. If they are ready to be punished, if they are ready to be silent, and even if protesters are ready to be beaten, maybe disabled or killed, what we can do?
Okay, thank you. I think that I will not take a gun even if they beat me, but this is open for discussion. Yuval, do you want to...
Just very shortly, so I think relating to your argument, I think it's actually not necessarily bullshit argumentation what's happening with the refugee regime, because actually what Europeans say is that because this is not part of the refugee definition, we're going to find another avenue. So in that sense, no, it's working within the law, saying there's a limitation. I think it's more about politics. I mean, there's a lot of
But
bullshit.
it's moving from legal justification to political.
Yes,
Ad
this
hoc
with
one.
this I
That's
agree.
what I
With this I
say.
agree.
Okay. Okay, we have